have low muscle mass and generally being like underweight, long hair. That stuff isn't really good if you're in a survival situation, and they generally want behaviors that make you dependent. And so you kind of humans kind of select for females to handicap themselves. I think that's more what's appealing. Because there's other cultures, like that's more maybe a Western thing, because there's other cultures where they value signs of wealth, like if you are resource security. So women that are fatter, have larger breasts and all that, that is more phenotypically female.
That was the thing back.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I was saying it's cultural.
Back in Rome,
I don't know if it's
all the
necessarily
paintings of
cultural,
like the Madonna and all that. The women were more voluptuous, I guess, and curvy. There was something to do about that, because they preferred that was considered more attractive back then. Like plump and you see all those pictures with the Catholic paintings with the women who are naked on like the couches or whatever. They're a little bit plumper because they preferred that back then.
Yeah, and then in the 60s that kind of changed.
I would not be surprised if
60s used to be thin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised if the preference for fatter women tracks with poverty levels or resource scarcity in a population, because you look at now, a lot of people that have secure resources tend to prefer thinner partners, whereas people that are poor tend to prefer you have to look at other cultures in in the various or typically other countries, and then their economic level, and it kind of tracks from what I've observed with resource scarcity, and so sexual preference for fatter women tends to track with how poor you are, because if you're wealthier, you know that you have resource security, and so a female that is very thin and kind of she has to work to maintain that figure, in the same sense that a woman in a poor country would have to work to maintain her figure, except the one that's well off would have to work by exercising. But it presumes some level of effort in either case.
Okay. All right, we got a lot of stuff going on in the live chat here. It's kind of going nuts here. All right, so where do you want to go with the gender thing? Because now that we seem to agree that there's two biological sexes, but there's all these different types of phenotypes and things of that nature, intersectionality. Let's talk about the actual gender issue. I mean, normally people will say that gender's on a spectrum, and I think that it actually is. I think there's a lot involved in gender. Somebody who's a good friend of ours, she is in the live chat, and she's talking about gender. It's not a social construct. I think it partly is. I think it's a psychological thing and a social construct. I think it involves a bunch of different things. But where do you fall in that gradient thing? So when you're talking about gender, is it a societal or is it strictly psychological?
In my personal opinion, I think that it is both psychological and societal, but that it doesn't exist in the same sense that a biological axiom would. It's in a sense self-imposed. So you can if you can identify with the concept or an aesthetic, then you can select for it. It's a choice to some degree, and you're going to have different proclivities that are natural. So depending on whether or not you're innately nurturing, one cultural aesthetic might appeal to you more than the other. But it really depends on if you are naturally nurturing and you were raised in a culture where women, for example, were discouraged from that, but men were encouraged to do that, you would probably identify more with the male concept in that culture than you would the female one. So I think that people have their natural proclivities, but that gender is largely, like, the gender constructs used are largely determined by the society, or like the gender roles are largely determined by the society. And it's the conflict between the internal drives and the society at large that causes people to identify with the concept of masculinity or the concept of femininity more than, like, more or less relative to themselves, I guess.
Yeah, I agree with that. Kyle, is that, what, do you kind of
I was just going to
agree
ask
with that?
Yeah. There's a interesting question going on in the live chat between a couple people. How many genders would you say that there are?
Yeah, what do you say to the people that only say there's two genders? Because I don't think that's right at all.
I think you can make up however many you want. Personally, like, I don't personally get why I would identify with the concept of male or female if it's just a cultural concept. Like, I personally don't give a rip what the cultural concepts are. I'm gonna do what I have my proclivities to do anyway, and then I don't really feel the need to label it as masculine or feminine. It just is the way I am, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't work for other people. That's just me personally.
But there's something to be said for the assignment of a gender role as opposed to gender expression, as somebody has pointed out. So if I have a gender role, for example, like societal things, gender roles change considerably over the years, right? Back 50 years ago, the gender role was a housewife stays home, cooks, bakes, and when the husband gets home, makes him dinner and, satisfies him in the bedroom kind of thing. That was the gender role. Now in 2020, almost, 2020 in next year, that role has completely changed. There's like equality where that doesn't take place. I mean, the male stays at home just as much as the female. It's not a societal construct as much as it was back then. Now, but gender expression, however, if I identify as a female and I express myself as a female, that is completely independent of what role I may take for gender.
Yes.
As far as the societal construct, correct?
Yes, but the societal construct does influence what is selected for in the female or male aesthetic. So, for example, if you identified as female, would you cut your hair a specific way? Would you dress a specific way? Would you alter your natural behavior or your natural preferences in a specific way to better fit with cultural ideal? Because, like, what about the way someone dresses or the way someone does their hair is inherently a gender trait? Like, it really has almost nothing to do with biological sex of the individual.
I don't know what you mean by trait. It's a it's something it's not even a phenotypical thing, because phenotypical depends on the genotype. So, it's just an expression thing. If I cut my hair, I'm just expressing like if I do like a pixie cut or something to look female, which, by the way, I really like pixie cuts. But if I do some kind of hairstyle that's more feminine, that's just a gender expression thing. That's nothing to do with.
But my question is, what about that hairstyle would make it feminine if it's not determined by culture?
Oh, I think it is culture, definitely. Well, one hairstyle might be in one culture, might be masculine in another. Sure.
Yeah, that was my point there.
And by the way, I don't mind. I have to ask this only because there's some things in the live chat. What do you associate with yourself? If we can ask, we don't mind. Because
I am cisgender, so I would be biologically
male, right?
female. No, female.
Oh, biologically, okay, female. Okay, because I wasn't sure, because when we first started, your mic seemed awfully high timbre.
Yeah.
So I thought I was because of your mic thing. So they're right. You're
might
biologically
be because
female.
of my mic thing. My mic's
well, it sounds good now, but before on the old mix call, it sounded so high, and I asked you didn't say anything, so I assumed you were a male. I'm sorry.
I see. I don't care. Is the thing. Like, I am female, but I don't identify with any concept of femininity or masculinity. I pretty much do whatever I want.
So you're more of
I see get that other people feel the need to label it. No, because that in itself is an identity.
True. Okay. Fair enough. You're a gender non-identifier. Okay.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
basically.
We'll go with that.
Gender
No
agnostic.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just because I can't prove to myself that it exists in a physical sense. I get there's like a 10% cortical density difference between the brains, but that's an average. Like the individual, it's going to vary. Also, for hormone levels, the individual is going to vary. One male could have less testosterone than an individual female that's still male and female.
Okay. So this kind of raises the question, though. It raises the question, though, and yes, I'm going to go there. Sorry, people. This is where it's going to jump the shark. Not by you, by the way, but by the audience. What pronoun do you go by?
She, her, but honestly, I don't really give a rip. It's just
so
language.
You don't give a shit. All right. I thank you. That is so refreshing to hear. I appreciate that.
Oh, you're already going there, aren't you?
I don't think I've ever been triggered in my entire life.
No, I mean, it's already resolved. Great. There you go. Sorry, no dumpster fire on that, people.
Are you not going to inquire further on
what does it require? Go ahead.
I know what you want to ask.
You can have that one.
You can ask pretty much anything. You can ask pretty much anything. I don't care. Kyle.
Well, I'll ask Steve because he's too scared. What's your view on using the pronouns that aren't traditional, like Z, Zim, and Zer, and those sort of pronouns?
Zoroastrium.
My position is that language evolves. So, because some languages don't have pronouns, some have pronouns for tables. I don't think that really matters.
I tend to agree.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't have an issue with that answer actually either. Language does evolve, and people can call themselves wherever. I think the pronoun issue goes into more. Do people have some kind of responsibility in society to call these individuals that have these weird pronouns that are not in society right now? I mean, Z, Zer, Zim is. I'm sorry. That's just nothing found in society right now. Now, 100 years from now, right, they may be as ubiquitous as he, she, or they, or whatever, right? I mean, but we're not 100 years from now. So you can't hold people now accountable for using pronouns that are only used in very select, small communities. That's the way I look at it. See, that could change, though.
To that, I would say, but do I have a responsibility to not refer to you as she? Because I don't think that I have a responsibility to refer to anybody in any particular way. I don't think that's a responsibility that exists in society. I mean, you can be rude and refer to somebody as something that they're not, or that they don't identify with. And a lot of times that you're intentionally trying to be rude, but you don't have a responsibility. I don't think it's a moral issue. It's just whether or not you decide to be rude to that particular person.
Here's what I think. I think that should it ever be something that you're forced to say, or that you get in trouble if you don't say it right? No, of course not. However,
that would be a violation of free speech.
Sure, but in the grand scheme of things, it's just a word that they want. That they want you. It's more comfortable for them to be referred to as, and if you're not a dick, just use it. You know what I mean? Like it's not the end of the world. That's how I think. That's how I feel about it.
I mean, each his own. I mean, go ahead.
I would argue that if someone's transgender and they appear female, and you're going to call them he in the middle of like a restaurant, I think Blair Wright said this, that is impractical. You can say,
I agree with that.
That's my friend over there. Look at him. People aren't going to know who you're talking about. On a day-to-day basis, that being a dick like that's kind of impractical.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
Like the purpose of language is to communicate. So.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on with that. The purpose is to communicate, and if you were right, if you were to say, hey, there's some like Blair, she looks I mean, she's gorgeous. And if
she looks more she than me, so
example. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because if you say there's my friend over there, check him out. People are not going to know what the hell you're talking about if you're talking about Blair, because she expresses herself very feminine. She's better looking than most people where they're born female.
Yeah. It's a very contentious issue, but I mean, I just look at it like, of course you shouldn't be regulated to have to to be forced to use